let's go for Laura's question about the Pitfalls with the insurance company, because I think that's something everybody wants to know. So I'm going to give you really quick a list of assistance animal pitfalls. And Laura, I hope this answers your question. Basically, restricting breed, restricting size or weight, requiring a pet deposit, charging a monthly pet fee, requiring tenants with emotional support animals to sign a pet or an animal addendum that contains conditions or restrictions not applicable to emotional support animals, such as requiring them to be in a crate, limiting residents to only only emotional support animals. All of those are pitfalls that you will fall into. So let's get back to her question specifically. If the animal that's being presented as an emotional support animal is a pit bull, or likewise a Rottweiler, an Akita, a German Shepherd, anything that most of us have as our restricted breeds is presented, and they want this animal, and you're giving them the answer that your insurance company will cancel or won't allow it, that is misguided, because there is a regulation that HUD has that says that the Department of Justice wants to know if your insurance carrier changes, modifies, or wants to cancel your insurance based on the fact that you're allowing one of these restricted animals into the residence. They will actually hold the insurance carrier liable, because you are going to have to comply with fair housing, so will they. So I have a real life story with that. One of my great clients was floored and said, my insurance carrier won't do it. And I said, well, that's against the law. You can't do that. You still have to make the accommodation. We pushed back against that insured, and they changed their policy.
Wow.
Just as of 2 weeks ago. So it's education. Some of these insurance carriers are just not up to speed on what the requirements are. And that's something I will make available, the HUD regulation showing that from the insurance carrier perspective, because I think a lot of people would like that in their back pocket to say, okay, I have to make the accommodation, and now I need to tell my insurance carrier they need to as well.
Yeah. And I think super important for any landlord listening, because that's something that has obviously been changing, or it's been evolving. And I know a lot of landlords, that's their go-to. Mm-hmm. That's their go-to. We can't do it because of this, or it's a restricted breed. So landlords, don't do that anymore.
Yeah, don't use that as a reason.
Right. All right. What else we got?
Okay, so Dennis asks, at what point should the prospective tenant bring up the issue of the emotional support animal? And can you charge an extra deposit or higher rent? And do ESAs include cats, snakes, or what other pets? So emotional support animals can basically consist of any animal. There's no defined limitation on them. However, I will caution that the rule is that you can deny the animal if the animal presents either a undue hardship or a burden for administrative purposes. So the undue hardship part of that will cover things such as your health code violations, or just your regular city code or town code that will prevent things such as exotic animals. So I have seen people make requests for monkeys, for tigers, for elephants, and I'm not kidding, snakes, tarantulas, pigs. So if you can look to your town code, your local code, and you could say exotic animals, for instance, are outlawed, and you can't do that, you can deny it based on the fact that you can't comply with that request. Again, that doesn't mean you can deny any animal. You just have to say that specific animal doesn't meet licensing requirements in this town. One of the things you always should ask for is veterinary records, because you want to make sure that they are up to date with things such as rabies shots, because again, they're living amongst other tenants. They need to comply with that still. One of the other things to always ask is whether or not the animal has ever bit anyone. And the reason in New York State, for instance, is a landlord who is put on notice that an animal has a vicious propensity to bite or has bit someone in the past. If that animal should bite again, the burden of liability shifts from the tenant to the landlord, and the landlord would be liable for that bite. Wow. So you need to ask that question.
Is an animal bite a reason to deny an ESA?
It absolutely could be. I mean, it's one of those things that you want to look back. How far ago did it do it? You know, did it do it when it was a puppy, and now the animal's 13 and it's not had any other issues since? case by case basis, but yes, it could potentially
That's so
be
sticky.
used.
It really is.
It always, and these are the questions, let your attorney vet.
Right.
Because then at least you could say, my attorney told me, and it's
Right,
not guessing to your boss.
Yeah,
right. All right. I know one of the questions that we had, I'm not sure if this was one that you prepared an answer for, but was about, Etta asked about, what if another tenant in the building has an allergy?
Yes.
Okay, so I know that's something that you have some experience with too.
So again, unfortunately, because you have to make this reasonable accommodation if they fulfill the obligations under the HUD guidance, the person with the allergy, while you want to safeguard them because they're probably a good tenant, paying on time, doing all the things they should do, and while I know people say it's not fair, unfortunately, you still need to make the reasonable accommodation. From a public relations standpoint, best practice would tend to be try and see if you can accommodate both. Ask the person with the allergy if they would be willing to relocate to another potential premise within your complex. If you just can't, then one of the things to do would be allow the tenant to break their lease without penalty. That's always something. And while you lose profit, you lose a good tenant. Again, it's a cost analysis between doing that to the good tenant who unfortunately now you can't accommodate and the one that brings a discrimination claim for $10,000 to start.
And that situation sort of encapsulates the frustration of landlords,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now you've got this tenant you have no loyalties to whatsoever other than you're trying to follow the laws.
Right.
But you may have a tenant that's been there for years and now you're letting them go.
The only thing to say is in a bigger complex, there's nothing to say you're guaranteeing a very specific unit for the person who's coming in with the emotional support animal. So if you can manipulate that, we have this person who has an allergy, I can't place you around them for for their health reasons. We have this other apartment that you can go to, if it's the same exact unit, first floor, 2-bedroom, you can move the person with emotional support animal over. And because they're asking for a reasonable accommodation, they should also understand the person who has a current, allergy situation going on. You would hope.
You would hope. I don't know if that's always the case.
Right.
All right. So, do you want to go over Sarah's there at the bottom, I think?
Sure. Sarah asks, if you are pre-screening a tenant and you ask about any pets or who will be living there and they make no mention of said support pet, is it considered withholding information if they fill out an application and tell you about the support pet?
Can we fix her nomenclature first?
Yes.
It's not support
Animal.
pet. It's not support
Yes.
pet
Support
ever.
animal.
Right.
Animal.
Right.
And in
Okay.
fact, I would get away from calling any pet a pet. I
Okay.
would start getting into this animal term.
Gotcha.
To cover all bases under the lease. So if you're pre-screening a tenant and you're asking about animals and you were to have this animal responsibility addendum as part of your screening process, part of your lease process, you wouldn't get into this situation because they would either mark yes or no. And then what you would want is you want a corresponding default provision in your lease that says any misrepresentation or omission in your application is a default under the terms of the lease. However, I caution you here in the realm of emotional support animals, while they might not have one when they move in, under the HUD guidance that came out in 2013, it specifically states that you can't deny that because they didn't give it to you when they moved in. It could be that 6 months down the line, you find they have an animal, you question them as to my animal responsibility addendum says you don't have one. And then they say to you, oh, it's an emotional support animal. At that point, you still need to go through the vetting process at that moment to see if the animal supports it. Now, they're telling you 6 months ago that this animal was an emotional support animal. They just didn't tell you. So you want to make sure that doctor's note justifies 6 months prior they were being seen.
Right.
And 6 months prior, it was an emotional support animal. You will trap people in that who are working the system.
That makes a lot of sense, actually. And I don't know how accurate this is, but I've heard that once an animal, emotional support animals and service animals are two kind of different beasts, I guess. I've heard that once it's like an actual service animal, like a properly trained service animal, say a seeing eye dog or something like that, it's not an animal anymore. the terminology changes to, I think it was like medical assistance device or something like that. It's not even, they don't even view it as an animal. They just view it no different than somebody who needs oxygen for COPD or something along those lines.
So quickly, we'll go over this really quick. So the term assistance animal is actually all encompassing. It covers service animals, therapy animals, and emotional assistance animals. Okay, so all of those cover one. Service animals, again, are very specifically constrained to guide dogs or seeing eye dogs. That's it. Hearing or signal dogs are the same thing. They're going to be wearing very specific gear that identifies them as a service animal. So people shouldn't question. They're also very specifically trained. From the time that they are puppies, they are specifically assigned to this person or this type of disability. And so they're trained right away up until the point where usually they're full grown or a year. And then they're assigned out to somebody for very specific purposes. So they will have specific training. They will have certifications. There should be no question. Those are very easy to say, okay, this meets that. Where emotional support animals, there's no training. There's no licensing requirement, and it could really be haphazard in what kind of animal it is. So that's where you start to get into people using the system to get what they want. You know, if people are saying, oh, they're trained to be an emotional support animal, they're using terms that don't go with it. So listen to what people are saying. If they start saying, oh, they're trained, they're certified, I have paperwork, wrong.